The rain drummed against the windows of the small apartment as Maya Chen sat curled up on her worn couch, staring at the acceptance letter in her trembling hands. The United States Marine Corps had accepted her application for officer candidate school. At 22, she had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl watching her grandfather's old war movies, but, now that it was real, fear crept up her spine like ice water. Maya had always been different from other girls her age. While they played with dolls, she built model airplanes. While they talked about boys, she read military history books. Her parents, both professors at the local university, had never understood her fascination with the military. They wanted her to follow in their footsteps, to pursue a safe career in academia. But Maya felt a calling that went deeper than their expectations. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, Maya had faced her share of challenges. She was petite, standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, with a quiet demeanor that many mistook for weakness. In high school, she had been the girl who sat alone at lunch, reading books about strategy and leadership while others gossiped about weekend parties. The popular kids called her names, whispered behind her back, and made her feel invisible. But Maya had learned to channel that pain into determination. Her decision to join the Marines had shocked everyone who knew her. Her best friend Sarah had laughed when Maya first mentioned it, thinking it was a joke. Her parents had staged what felt like an intervention, bringing in relatives and family friends to talk her out of what they saw as a dangerous fantasy. Even her high school guidance counselor had suggested she considered more suitable careers for someone of her size and temperament. But Maya had a secret that nobody knew about. Every morning for the past 3 years, she had been waking up at 5 in the morning to train. She ran miles through the forest trails behind her house, did push-ups and sit-ups until her muscles screamed, and practiced martial arts moves she learned from YouTube videos. She had transformed her body and mind in preparation for this moment, but she had done it all in secret, afraid that if anyone knew about her real goals, they would find new ways to crush her dreams. The day she had to report to officer candidate school at Quantico, Virginia, her parents drove her to the airport in tense silence. Her mother cried quietly in the passenger seat, while her father gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. They thought they were taking their daughter to her doom. "You can still change your mind," her mother whispered as they stood at the security checkpoint. "There's no shame in admitting this isn't for you." Maya hugged her parents, feeling the weight of their love and fear, but also the strength of her own conviction. "I have to do this, Mom. I've always known this is where I belong." The flight to Virginia felt like the longest 3 hours of her life. Maya sat in her window seat, watching the country pass beneath her, and tried to prepare herself mentally for what was coming. She had read every book, watched every documentary, and memorized every piece of advice she could find about Marine training. But she knew that no amount of preparation could really ready her for the reality of what she was about to face. When the plane landed, Maya took a deep breath and stepped into her new life. The bus ride to Quantico was filled with other young people who looked just as nervous as she felt. There were tall, muscular men who looked like they had stepped out of recruitment posters, confident women who carried themselves like athletes, and a few people who, like Maya, seemed to be questioning what they had gotten themselves into. The first thing that hit her when they arrived at the base was the noise. Drill instructors were everywhere, shouting instructions, barking orders, and creating an atmosphere of controlled chaos that made Maya's heart race. She grabbed her single duffel bag and followed the crowd toward the processing center, trying to make herself invisible. But invisibility was not an option in the Marines. "You. Tiny. What's your name?" The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a woman who stood nearly 6 feet tall with arms that looked like they could bench press a small car. She was pointing directly at Maya, who felt every eye in the room turn toward her. "Maya Chen, ma'am," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't hear you. Are you a mouse or a Marine candidate?" "Maya Chen, ma'am." This time her voice carried across the room, surprising even herself with its clarity and strength. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, and Maya could see the skepticism in her eyes. It was a look she had grown accustomed to over the years, the look that said, "What is this little girl doing here?" "Well, Chen, I hope you're tougher than you look, because this isn't summer camp. Half of the people in this room won't make it through the first week.
I'm betting you'll be one of them.
The word stung, but Maya had heard worse. She straightened her shoulders and met the staff sergeant's gaze directly.
Yes, ma'am.
The first few days were a blur of medical examinations, paperwork, uniform fittings, and orientation sessions. Maya found herself assigned to a squad with 11 other candidates, and it quickly became clear that she was going to have to prove herself every single day. Her squad mates weren't intentionally cruel, but their doubt was obvious. During the initial fitness assessments, she could hear them whispering behind her back. "How did she even qualify for this program?" asked Thompson, a former college football player from Texas who looked like he could crush Maya with one hand. "Maybe they needed to fill a diversity quota," replied Jenkins, a tall woman from California who had been a competitive swimmer in college. Maya pretended not to hear, but each comment felt like a small knife. She had expected this, had prepared herself mentally for the doubt and the dismissal, but experiencing it in person was harder than she had imagined. The physical training began immediately, and Maya threw herself into every exercise with desperate determination. During the morning runs, she stayed with the pack even when her lungs felt like they were on fire. During the obstacle course training, she attacked each barrier with calculated precision, using her smaller size and flexibility to her advantage when brute strength wasn't enough. But it was during the first combat training exercise that things really began to escalate. The exercise was designed to simulate a patrol mission, with half the squad playing the role of enemy combatants and the other half attempting to complete an objective. Maya found herself on the attacking team, paired with Rodriguez, a different Rodriguez from the staff sergeant, this one a quiet guy from New Mexico, and tasked with capturing a strategic position. The defending team included Thompson, Jenkins, and 4 other candidates who had quickly established themselves as the alpha personalities of the squad. As Maya and her partner approached their assigned position, she could hear Thompson's voice carrying across the training area.
"This should be easy. Chen probably can't even carry her rifle properly." The comment triggered something deep inside Maya, a fury that she had been suppressing for weeks. She signaled to Rodriguez to follow her lead and began moving with a speed and precision that surprised even her. Using the terrain to her advantage, she flanked the defending position while Rodriguez provided a distraction from the front. Within minutes, she had reached the objective undetected. The defending team was so focused on Rodriguez's obvious approach that they never saw Maya coming from the side. She eliminated 2 of the defenders with simulated gunfire before they even realized she was there, then captured the strategic position while the rest of her team moved in to secure the area. The drill instructor who had been observing the exercise blew his whistle, ending the simulation. "Cease fire. Exercise complete. Chen's team wins." The silence that followed was deafening. Thompson and Jenkins stared at Maya with expressions of shock and something that looked like embarrassment.
Maya herself was breathing heavily, not from exertion but from the adrenaline of proving herself in such a decisive way.
"Outstanding tactical awareness, Chen," the drill instructor continued.
"You used the terrain effectively and capitalized on your opponent's assumptions about your capabilities.
This is exactly the kind of thinking we want to see from future Marine officers."
As they walked back to the barracks, Maya could feel the shift in how her squad mates looked at her. The doubt was still there, but it was mixed now with something else. Respect, maybe, or at least a recognition that she might be more than they had initially assumed. But not everyone was ready to accept this new reality.
That evening, as Maya was cleaning her rifle in preparation for the next day's training, Thompson approached her bunk.
His usual swagger was replaced by something harder, more aggressive. "Don't think one lucky exercise makes you a real Marine," he said, loud enough for the entire squad to hear.
"This isn't a game, Chen.
People's lives depend on their leaders being strong enough to handle real combat.
You might be able to play hide and seek during training, but what happens when you're facing real bullets?" Maya looked up from her rifle, meeting his gaze steadily. "I guess we'll find out when we get there." "Will we? Because I'm betting you'll wash out long before then."
Little girls who think they can play soldier usually figure out pretty quickly that this isn't where they belong. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maya could feel her squad mates watching, waiting to see how she would respond. She could take the safe route, ignore the provocation and hope things would calm down. Or she could stand up for herself and risk making even more enemies.
She chose to stand up. You know what, Thompson? You're right about one thing. This isn't a game.
And if you keep underestimating people based on how they look, you're going to get yourself and your Marines killed someday.
A good leader judges people by their actions, not their appearance. Thompson's face flushed red. Are you lecturing me about leadership? You've been here for exactly 1 week. And, in that week, I've learned that the loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest.
Maya set down her rifle and stood up, her small frame dwarfed by Thompson's bulk but her voice carrying absolute conviction. If you have a problem with my performance, take it up with the instructors.
But don't waste my time or everyone else's with playground bullying.
The confrontation might have escalated further, but Staff Sergeant Rodriguez chose that moment to enter the barracks for evening inspection. The tension in the room was obvious, but she chose not to address it directly. Instead, she began her usual routine of examining each candidate's equipment and living space. When she reached Maya's bunk, she paused for a moment longer than usual, examining the perfectly cleaned rifle and meticulously organized gear.
Chen, your weapon maintenance is outstanding. This is exactly the standard I want to see from all of you.
It was a small comment, but, in the context of the confrontation that had just occurred, it felt like a validation. Maya had earned praise not because she was trying to prove something, but because she had genuinely excelled at the required task. After lights out, Maya lay in her narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling. The day had been a victory of sorts, but she knew it was only the beginning.
Thompson's hostility hadn't disappeared, if anything, it had probably intensified.
And she was still the smallest, quietest person in a program designed to produce warriors. But something had changed inside her during that combat exercise. For the first time since arriving at Quantico, she had felt truly confident in her abilities. She had trusted her training, used her natural advantages, and succeeded not by being someone else, but by being the best version of herself. As she drifted off to sleep, Maya thought about her grandfather's stories of his time in the Pacific during World War II. He had been a small man too, but he had served with distinction and had come home with medals and the respect of his fellow Marines. He had always told her that courage wasn't about being the biggest or the strongest, it was about doing what needed to be done, even when you were scared. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and probably new conflicts with Thompson and others who still saw her as an outsider. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at Quantico, Maya Chen fell asleep feeling like she truly belonged here.
The next morning brought news that would test everyone's resolve.
Their squad, along with 2 others, had been selected for an advanced combat simulation that would take place in the Virginia wilderness. The exercise would last for 5 days and would simulate real combat conditions as closely as possible. It would be their biggest test yet, and everyone knew that performance during this exercise would have a major impact on their final rankings. As Maya prepared her gear for the exercise, she caught fragments of conversation from her squad mates. The consensus seemed to be that this would be where the real candidates would separate themselves from those who were just pretending to be Marines. And, based on the looks she was getting, many of them still considered her to be in the latter category. But Maya had spent too many years preparing for moments like this to be intimidated now. As she shouldered her pack and fell into formation with the rest of her squad, she felt a familiar calm settling over her. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed about, and what she knew she was meant to do. The test of her resolve was about to begin in earnest. The Virginia wilderness stretched endlessly in every direction as Maya's squad made their way deeper into the forest. The advanced combat simulation had begun at dawn, and already the October air carried a bite that promised uncomfortable nights ahead. Maya adjusted her pack straps and checked her compass for the 100th time, trying to ignore the whispered conversations happening behind her. 5 days with Princess Maya, she heard Thompson mutter to Jenkins. This should be entertaining. The nickname stung. It had started after the confrontation in the barracks and had spread through not just her squad but other squads as well. Maya knew it was meant to diminish her, to reduce her to a stereotype of fragility and privilege. The irony wasn't lost on her that they had chosen to mock her with a title that implied royalty while treating her like she was beneath them. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had divided the 36 candidates into 6 teams of 6, with each team responsible for completing a series of objectives over the 5-day period. Maya's team included Thompson, Jenkins, Rodriguez, the quiet one from New Mexico, Williams, a former Army enlisted who was trying to become an officer, and Patterson, a college graduate who had never served but had excelled in every academic portion of their training. Their first objective was to reach a checkpoint 12 miles into the wilderness, establish a defensive perimeter, and hold it against simulated enemy attacks while gathering intelligence on enemy movements. It sounded straightforward on paper, but Maya knew that the instructors would throw complications at them that would test not just their tactical skills but their ability to work together under stress. The team moved through the forest in a tactical formation, with Thompson naturally assuming the role of team leader despite the fact that no official leader had been designated. Maya found herself assigned to the rear guard position, which she suspected was Thompson's way of keeping her out of important decisions. 3 hours into the march, their first test came. Williams, who was walking point, suddenly raised his fist in the air, signaling the team to halt. Everyone dropped to one knee and waited as Williams crept forward to investigate what had caught his attention. When he returned, his expression was grim. "There's a ravine ahead that's not on our maps. It's about 30 feet wide and maybe 20 feet deep. There's no way around it for at least a mile in either direction." Thompson studied the map, his jaw clenched with frustration. "This has to be one of the instructor modifications. They want to see how we handle unexpected obstacles." The team moved forward to examine the ravine. It was indeed exactly as Williams had described, a gash in the earth that completely blocked their planned route. Maya studied the terrain while the others debated their options. "We could rappel down and climb up the other side," suggested Jenkins. Everyone brought rope. "That would take too much time," Thompson replied. "And it would leave us exposed if there are any opposing forces in the area." "What if we build a bridge?" offered Patterson. "There are plenty of fallen trees around here." Maya had been quietly examining the ravine while the others talked. She noticed something that they had missed, a narrow section about 100 yards to the north where a large tree had fallen across the gap. The tree was thick enough to walk across, but it would require careful balance and nerves of steel. "There's a natural bridge up there," she said, pointing to the fallen tree. Thompson followed her gaze and shook his head immediately. "Too dangerous. That tree could be rotten, and if someone falls, we lose a team member." "It's not rotten," Maya replied, walking toward the tree. "Look at the bark pattern and the way it fell. This tree came down recently, probably during the last storm. It's still solid." She reached the fallen tree and tested it carefully, bouncing gently on the trunk to check its stability. The tree held firm, showing no signs of weakness or decay. "Chen, get away from there," Thompson ordered. "We're not risking anyone on that tree." But Maya was already walking across, moving with the confident grace of someone who had spent her childhood climbing trees in the Oregon forests. She made it to the other side in less than a minute and turned back to face her team. "It's completely stable," she called across the ravine. "And it's wide enough to cross safely if you take your time." Thompson's face was red with anger. "You just disobeyed a direct order." "You're not my commanding officer," Maya replied calmly. "And I just proved that this route is safe and efficient. We can have the whole team across in 10 minutes instead of spending 2 hours building a bridge or rappelling." The rest of the team looked back and forth between Thompson and Maya, clearly uncertain about what to do. Finally, Williams stepped forward. "She's right about the tree being solid. I can see from here that it's freshly fallen and stable. This is the fastest route." One by one, the other team members crossed the ravine on Maya's tree bridge. Thompson went last, his face dark with humiliation. When he reached the other side, he got directly in Maya's face. "Don't ever pull a stunt like that again. You could have gotten yourself killed, and then, the rest of us would have had to deal with the consequences." "I assessed the risk and determined it was acceptable," Maya replied. "That's what Marines do. Marines follow orders." Marines also show initiative and solve problems.
Which is exactly what I did.
The confrontation might have continued, but Rodriguez pointed to his watch. We're burning daylight. The checkpoint is still 8 miles away, and we need to get there before dark to establish our perimeter. Thompson glared at Maya for another moment before shouldering his pack and resuming the march. But the dynamic of the team had shifted. Maya had not only solved their problem but had done so by taking decisive action while the others were still debating options. It was exactly the kind of leadership initiative that the instructors were looking for, and everyone knew it. The rest of the march passed without major incident, but Maya could feel the tension building within the team. Every decision became a subtle power struggle between her and Thompson, with the other team members caught in the middle. By the time they reached their assigned checkpoint, the sun was setting and everyone was exhausted. The checkpoint turned out to be a small clearing on top of a hill that provided good visibility in all directions. It was a defensible position, but it would require careful organization to create an effective perimeter. Thompson began assigning positions without consulting anyone else, treating the team like a military unit with himself as the commanding officer.
Jenkins, you take the north side. Williams, you've got east. Patterson, you're on the south approach. Rodriguez, you take the west side.
Chen, you're in the center handling communications and logistics.
Maya realized immediately what Thompson was doing.
He was putting her in the safest position, away from any potential action, where she couldn't distinguish herself if they faced an attack. It was a subtle way of marginalizing her while making it look like he was giving her an important responsibility.
Actually, Maya said, I think we should rotate positions every 2 hours.
That way everyone stays alert, and we get multiple perspectives on each approach route. I've already made the assignments, Thompson replied curtly.
And I'm suggesting we modify them for better security. Are you questioning my tactical judgment?
Maya looked around at the rest of the team, who were watching this latest confrontation with expressions ranging from discomfort to fascination. She realized that this moment was crucial. If she backed down now, she would be accepting a subordinate role for the rest of the exercise. But if she pushed too hard, she risked alienating teammates she needed to work with. I'm suggesting we use all of our resources effectively, she said carefully. Everyone on this team has different strengths and experiences. Why not take advantage of all of them? Before Thompson could respond, the distinctive crack of simulated gunfire echoed through the forest. The opposing force had found them, and the first attack of the exercise was beginning.
Contact! Multiple shooters from the north. Jenkins shouted from her position.
The team immediately dropped into defensive positions, but, in the chaos of the sudden attack, Thompson's carefully planned assignments fell apart.
Williams found himself out of position when the attack came from a direction he wasn't covering.
Patterson froze for a crucial moment, unsure of where he was supposed to be.
Maya, meanwhile, moved instinctively to where she was needed most.
She had spotted muzzle flashes coming from a position that would allow the attacking force to flank Jenkins, and she moved quickly to intercept them. Using the terrain to her advantage, she worked her way around to where she could get a clear shot at the attackers. The simulation used laser tag equipment that registered hits accurately, and Maya managed to eliminate 3 of the attacking force before they realized she was there. Her actions allowed Jenkins to reposition safely and gave the team time to organize an effective defense.
The attack lasted 15 minutes before the opposing force withdrew, having failed to achieve their objective of overrunning the checkpoint.
When the exercise controllers called an end to the engagement, Maya's team had suffered only 1 simulated casualty, while they had eliminated 5 members of the attacking force. The instructor who had been observing the engagement approached their position with a clipboard, making notes about their performance.
Good defensive action overall. Chen, your flanking maneuver was particularly effective.
You identified a threat that others missed and took decisive action to neutralize it.
Thompson's jaw was clenched so tight that Maya could see the muscles standing out in his neck.
Once again, she had distinguished herself while his leadership had faltered under pressure. That night, as they set up their sleeping areas and prepared for the long, cold night ahead, Maya could feel the hostility radiating from Thompson like heat from a fire. The other team members seemed uncertain about how to navigate the growing tension between their two strongest personalities. "You know," Jenkins said quietly as they shared a cold meal of military rations, "that was some impressive shooting today, Maya."
"Where did you learn to move like that?" "I grew up in Oregon. Lots of time in the woods, hunting with my dad." It wasn't entirely true. Maya's father was a literature professor who had never fired a gun in his life, but she had spent countless hours in the wilderness, and she had taught herself to shoot at a local range.
"Well, it showed. You probably saved my life during that engagement." Maya glanced over at Thompson, who was pointedly ignoring their conversation while aggressively cleaning his rifle. She knew that every compliment she received, every moment of recognition, was driving the wedge between them deeper. But she also knew she couldn't afford to apologize for excelling. This was exactly what she had trained for, exactly what she was meant to do. If Thompson couldn't handle being outperformed by someone half his size, that was his problem to solve, not hers. The second night of the exercise was when things really began to fall apart. They were awakened at 2 a.m. by simulated artillery fire, followed immediately by another ground attack. This time, the opposing force was larger and better organized, and they had clearly learned from their previous failed attempt. The attack came from multiple directions simultaneously, designed to confuse and overwhelm the defending team. In the darkness and chaos, communication became nearly impossible, and Thompson's rigid command structure completely broke down. Maya found herself separated from the rest of the team when she moved to counter what appeared to be a flanking attack from the west. She spent 20 minutes engaged in a running gunfight through the forest before she realized that she had been drawn away from the main engagement by a deliberate distraction. When she finally made it back to the checkpoint, she discovered that the rest of her team had been overrun. Everyone except Rodriguez had been eliminated, and he was pinned down behind a fallen log with no way to reach the radio to call for reinforcements. Maya assessed the situation quickly. The opposing force had captured the high ground and was systematically eliminating any resistance. Rodriguez had maybe 5 minutes before they would flank his position and eliminate him as well. Without hesitation, Maya began moving through the forest, using every skill she had learned to approach the enemy position undetected. The darkness was her ally, and her small size allowed her to move through underbrush that would have stopped a larger person. It took her 15 minutes to work her way around to where she could engage the opposing force from behind. When she opened fire, the effect was devastating. The enemy had been so focused on eliminating Rodriguez that they hadn't established rear security, and Maya was able to eliminate 4 of them before they even realized they were under attack. The sudden reversal of fortune allowed Rodriguez to rally and rejoin the fight. Together, they managed to eliminate the remaining members of the opposing force and retake their checkpoint. Technically, they had lost the engagement because most of their team had been eliminated, but they had demonstrated remarkable resilience and tactical thinking under pressure. When the sun rose the next morning, Thompson was barely speaking to Maya at all. The rest of the team found themselves walking on eggshells, trying to avoid taking sides in what had become an increasingly personal conflict. The third day brought their most challenging test yet. Their new objective was to locate and capture a high-value target who was supposedly hiding somewhere in a 10-square-mile area of forest. They had 48 hours to complete the mission, and they would be competing against the other teams to see who could accomplish the objective first. Thompson gathered the team around a map and began outlining his strategy. It was methodical and thorough, involving a systematic search of the entire area in a grid pattern. It would probably work eventually, but it would also take the full 48 hours and would leave them vulnerable to other teams who might stumble across their target through luck or better tactics. Maya studied the map while Thompson talked, looking for patterns and clues that might give them an advantage. The target's last known position had been near a stream that ran through the center of their search area. There were several abandoned buildings marked on the map, but most of them were in areas that would be difficult to reach quickly if the target needed to escape. "What if we focus on the buildings near water sources?" Maya suggested when Thompson finished his briefing. The target would need access to fresh water, and these locations would give him multiple escape routes. "We're not changing the plan," Thompson replied without even looking at the map areas she had identified. "A systematic search is the most reliable method."
But, if another team gets there first, the plan stands, Chen.
You can either follow it or find yourself a new team. Maya realized that Thompson was no longer interested in winning the exercise. His primary goal had become proving that he was in charge, even if it meant accepting failure. She looked around at the other team members and could see the same realization dawning on their faces. That's when Maya made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to argue with Thompson, she quietly approached Rodriguez and Williams while Thompson was checking his equipment. "Listen," she said quietly, "I'm going to scout ahead to the buildings near the water sources.
If I find anything, I'll radio back."
If Thompson wants to stick with the grid search, that's his choice, but we don't have to fail just because he's being stubborn.
Rodriguez nodded immediately. "I'll come with you. 2 people can cover more ground than 1. Williams looked uncertain. "What if Thompson orders us to stick together?" "Then, we follow orders," Maya replied.
"But, right now, he's planning to spend 2 days searching an area that could be covered in 6 hours if we're smart about it." When Thompson finished his equipment check, he discovered that Maya and Rodriguez were missing. He spent 10 minutes searching the immediate area before Jenkins admitted that she had seen them heading toward the stream. "They said they were going to scout ahead," she explained.
Thompson's reaction was explosive. "I am the team leader. Nobody moves without my authorization."
"Actually," Patterson said quietly, "no one appointed you team leader.
You just assumed the role."
It was the first time anyone had directly challenged Thompson's authority, and the effect was electric. Thompson stared at Patterson with a mixture of shock and rage, while the others watched to see what would happen next.
"Are you kidding me?
I'm the most experienced person on this team." "Experience doesn't automatically make you a good leader," Jenkins replied. "Maya has been outperforming all of us since day one, but you're so threatened by her that you'd rather lose than let her contribute." Thompson was speechless. For 3 days, he had assumed that everyone recognized his natural authority, and now he was discovering that his team had been questioning his leadership all along.
Meanwhile, Maya and Rodriguez were making their way through the forest toward the first of the abandoned buildings.
Maya had studied the map carefully and had identified 3 locations that seemed most likely to house their target. If they could check all 3 in the next few hours, they would either find their objective or eliminate the most probable hiding spots. The first building was a deserted ranger station about 2 miles from their starting point. Maya and Rodriguez approached it carefully, using hand signals to coordinate their movement. The building appeared empty, but they conducted a thorough search anyway, looking for any signs that someone had been there recently. They found nothing, but as they were preparing to leave, Rodriguez noticed something that Maya had missed. "Look at the dust patterns on the floor," he whispered.
"Someone's been here, but not recently. Maybe a week ago."
Maya studied the barely visible tracks and nodded. Their target had probably used this building at some point but had moved on. That meant he was mobile, which supported her theory that he would stay near water sources where he could move quickly if necessary. The second building was an old hunting cabin about 3 miles upstream. This time, they found clear evidence of recent habitation. There was a sleeping bag in one corner, empty food containers, and, most importantly, a map of the area with several locations marked in pencil.
"He's definitely been here," Rodriguez whispered as they examined the map. "Look at these marks. He's been planning escape routes." Maya studied the marked locations and felt a surge of excitement. The target wasn't just hiding, he was running a sophisticated evasion operation. But his own map had revealed his strategy. One of the marked locations was a cave system about a mile further upstream, and, based on the other marks, it looked like his primary fallback position. "We need to get there before he realizes we've found his cabin," Maya said. They radioed their findings back to the rest of the team, but Thompson's response was predictably hostile. "Get back here immediately. You're compromising the mission by operating independently." "We've located the target's primary hiding spot," Maya replied. "We can have him in custody within the hour." "That's a direct order, Chen. Return to the team immediately." Maya looked at Rodriguez, who shrugged and pointed toward the cave system. Your call, he said. Maya keyed the radio one more time. We're pursuing a time-critical lead. We'll report back when we have the target.
Then, she turned off the radio. The cave system was exactly where the target's map had indicated, hidden among a cluster of large rocks near a bend in the stream. Maya and Rodriguez approached it with extreme caution, knowing that if they were right, they were about to complete the mission that would determine their final standings in the program. As they got closer, they could smell wood smoke. Someone was definitely in the cave, and they were confident enough in their security to risk making a fire. Maya signaled for Rodriguez to circle around to the rear of the cave system while she approached from the front. What happened next would become legendary among the candidates in their class, a story that would be told and retold for years afterward. But, for Maya, it was simply the moment when all of her training, all of her preparation, and all of her determination came together in perfect harmony. She was about to prove, once and for all, that size and stereotypes meant nothing when measured against skill, intelligence, and sheer force of will. Maya crouched behind a boulder 30 feet from the cave entrance, her heart pounding as she watched thin wisps of smoke curl up from inside. Rodriguez had moved into position at the rear exit, and they were ready to move in on their target. But, as she prepared to signal the advance, Maya heard something that made her blood freeze. Voices. Multiple voices coming from inside the cave. She pressed herself closer to the rock and listened carefully. There weren't just one or two people in there, she could distinguish at least 4 different voices, maybe more. This wasn't just their assigned target hiding in a cave. This was something much more complex. Maya keyed her radio to contact Rodriguez, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. Rodriguez, do you copy? Copy. What's the situation? Multiple voices inside the cave. This isn't just our target. I think we've stumbled into a larger scenario. There was a pause before Rodriguez responded. Orders? Maya closed her eyes and tried to think. The smart thing to do would be to pull back, call for backup, and wait for the rest of their team. But she knew that Thompson would use any delay as proof that her independent operation had been reckless and dangerous. More importantly, she could hear vehicles approaching in the distance. Other teams were converging on this area, probably following the same clues she had found. If they waited, they would lose their advantage and might fail the mission entirely. We go in, Maya decided. But, carefully. I'll create a distraction at the front while you secure the rear exit. Don't let anyone escape, but don't engage unless you have to. Roger that. Maya took a deep breath and began moving toward the cave entrance. She had never felt more alone or more determined in her entire life. Everything she had worked for, everything she had endured, came down to the next few minutes. As she got closer to the cave, she could hear the conversation inside more clearly. Her assigned target was definitely there, but he was talking to what sounded like instructors or role players who were part of a larger scenario. Maya realized that this wasn't just a capture mission, it was a complex test designed to simulate real-world operations where intelligence was incomplete and situations could change rapidly. She reached the cave entrance and peered inside. The cave was larger than she had expected, opening into a natural chamber about 20 feet wide. Her target, a Marine instructor playing the role of a terrorist leader, was sitting around a small fire with 3 other people who appeared to be his subordinates. They were discussing plans for additional operations, treating this as an active terrorist cell rather than a simple hiding exercise. Maya pulled back and considered her options. A direct assault would be extremely dangerous, especially outnumbered 4-1. But she also realized that this was exactly the kind of scenario that real Marine officers would face in the field, situations where perfect intelligence wasn't available and decisive action was required despite incomplete information. She made her decision. Instead of attacking immediately, Maya began moving around the perimeter of the cave, looking for additional information and better positioning. What she discovered changed everything. There were weapons caches hidden around the cave entrance, sophisticated communication equipment, and detailed maps showing planned operations across a wide area. This wasn't just an exercise about capturing a single target. This was a test of whether candidates could adapt to a complex, evolving situation and make strategic decisions under pressure. Maya keyed her radio one more time, but this time she contacted not just Rodriguez but her entire team.
All stations, this is Chen.
I'm at the target location, and the situation is more complex than briefed. Multiple hostiles, weapons caches, and intelligence materials that suggest ongoing operations.
Request immediate support.
Thompson's response was immediate and furious.
Chen, you will cease this unauthorized operation and return to base immediately.
But, before Maya could respond, a different voice came over the radio, one of the exercise controllers. All teams, be advised that the scenario has evolved. Recent intelligence suggests that your target is not operating alone. Adapt your tactics accordingly and proceed with the mission.
Maya smiled grimly.
The instructors had been monitoring her radio communications and had decided to use her discovery to modify the exercise for all teams. Her independent action hadn't just found the target, it had uncovered a more sophisticated test that would challenge everyone more effectively. But Thompson wasn't finished.
Chen, I am ordering you to withdraw immediately. You are compromising this entire operation.
Negative, Maya replied calmly. I have eyes on the target and actionable intelligence.
I'm proceeding with the mission.
What Maya did next would be talked about in Marine training circles for years to come. Instead of waiting for backup or attempting a direct assault, she improvised a solution that used her unique advantages and turned the enemy's numbers against them. First, she located the cave's main ventilation shaft, a natural chimney that drew air through the chamber. Using materials from one of the weapons caches, she created a smoke generator that would fill the cave with thick, choking smoke without actually endangering anyone. The smoke would force the occupants to evacuate through the exits, where she and Rodriguez could capture them one by one.
But Maya didn't stop there.
While she was setting up her smoke device, she also placed small charges from the weapons cache near the cave's communication equipment. When those charges detonated, they would destroy the intelligence materials and prevent the enemy from calling for reinforcements. Finally, she positioned herself where she could monitor both the front and rear exits, with Rodriguez covering the back end, providing backup if her plan failed. Maya activated her devices and watched as thick smoke began pouring into the cave. Within minutes, she could hear coughing and shouting from inside as the occupants realized they needed to evacuate immediately. The first person to emerge from the cave was one of the subordinates, a Marine instructor who was clearly disoriented by the smoke. Maya subdued him quickly and efficiently, using martial arts techniques she had been practicing for years. He was eliminated from the exercise before he fully realized what was happening.
The second person out was another subordinate, this one armed and ready for a fight.
But Maya had positioned herself in deep shadows beside the cave entrance, and she was able to eliminate him with simulated gunfire before he could locate her position. By now, the remaining occupants of the cave knew they were under attack, but the smoke made it impossible for them to see who was attacking them or from which direction. Maya could hear her primary target shouting orders, trying to organize a defense, but his men were scattered and confused.
When the third subordinate emerged from the cave, Maya was ready.
But, this time, instead of engaging him directly, she used a technique that would become her signature move during the rest of her Marine career. She threw a rock to create noise on one side of the cave entrance, drawing the enemy's attention in that direction. When he moved to investigate, Maya emerged from concealment on the opposite side and eliminated him with a combination of speed, precision, and tactical thinking that left the exercise observers speechless. Finally, her primary target emerged from the cave, coughing and desperate. He was the most experienced of the role players, a seasoned Marine instructor who had been expecting to test the candidate's abilities. Instead, he found himself alone, disoriented, and facing an opponent who had systematically eliminated his entire team using nothing but intelligence, improvisation, and flawless execution.
The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Maya had anticipated his most likely moves, positioned herself perfectly, and struck with precision that would have made her grandfather proud. When it was over, she had single-handedly captured the target and his entire organization, secured valuable intelligence materials, and completed the mission with 0 casualties on her side. Rodriguez arrived at the cave entrance just as Maya was securing the target with zip ties.
Holy shit, Maya, he breathed, looking at the 4 eliminated roleplayers lying around the cave entrance.
What the hell happened here? Successful mission completion, Maya replied calmly, though inside she was shaking with adrenaline.
Target secured, intelligence materials recovered, enemy organization neutralized. The exercise controller's voice crackled over the radio.
All teams, the exercise is complete. Team 6 has successfully completed the primary objective. All candidates report to base camp for debrief.
Maya could hear Thompson's voice in the background, arguing with someone about the radio protocols, but she tuned him out. She had proven everything she needed to prove, not just to Thompson or her teammates, but to herself.
The hike back to base camp was surreal.
Word of Maya's single-handed capture of the entire enemy organization had spread quickly through the exercise area, and, when other teams encountered them on the trail, Maya found herself receiving respectful nods and impressed looks from candidates who had barely acknowledged her existence a few days earlier.
But it was Thompson's reaction that surprised her most. Instead of anger or resentment, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like relief. The constant conflict between them had been exhausting for everyone, and perhaps he was finally ready to accept that Maya belonged here just as much as he did. When they reached base camp, Maya expected to be debriefed and, then, allowed to rest before the final day of exercises. Instead, she found herself face to face with Colonel Martinez, the overall commander of the officer candidate school, who had apparently flown out to the field specifically to meet with her. "Candidate Chen," the colonel said, "I've been following your performance throughout this exercise, and I have to say that what you accomplished today was exceptional. You demonstrated tactical thinking, leadership under pressure, and improvisation skills that would be impressive in an experienced officer, let alone a candidate." Maya felt her face flush with pride, but she kept her voice steady. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing what the mission required. That's exactly the right attitude. But I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. How do you feel about the way your team has been functioning? Specifically, the leadership dynamics and communication patterns?"
Maya glanced over at Thompson, who was standing nearby with the rest of her team. She realized that this was a crucial moment, not just for her but for all of them. The colonel wasn't just evaluating her individual performance, he was assessing the team dynamics and how they had affected the mission. "Sir, our team has struggled with leadership issues," Maya replied carefully. "We have strong individual performers, but we haven't always worked effectively as a unit.
I think we've all learned important lessons about communication and mutual respect."
The colonel nodded thoughtfully.
"And what do you think those lessons are?" Maya took a deep breath.
"I think we've learned that leadership isn't about being the biggest or the loudest person in the room. It's about making good decisions under pressure and helping your team succeed. I also think we've learned that everyone has something to contribute, regardless of how they look or what assumptions people might make about them."
"Interesting. Candidate Thompson, do you agree with that assessment?"
Thompson stepped forward, his face flushed but his voice steady.
"Yes, sir. I think I let my ego get in the way of effective teamwork."
Candidate Chen consistently demonstrated superior tactical thinking and leadership skills, and, instead of supporting her contributions, I let personal issues interfere with the mission. Maya stared at Thompson in shock. It was the last thing she had expected to hear from him, and she could see that it was costing him considerable effort to admit his mistakes so publicly. "That's an honest and mature response," the colonel replied. "Leadership requires the ability to recognize and learn from mistakes, and it sounds like you've done that."
"Candidate Chen, how do you respond to Candidate Thompson's comments?"
Maya looked at Thompson, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since they had met. Under all the bluster and aggression, she realized, was someone who was just as scared and insecure as she was. He had been trying to prove himself just as desperately as she had, but he had chosen a different strategy. "Sir, I think candidate Thompson has shown real leadership by being willing to acknowledge his mistakes and learn from them. That takes courage. I hope we can work more effectively together going forward."
The colonel smiled. "Excellent.
You know, one of the most important qualities we look for in Marine officers is the ability to build effective teams from diverse groups of people.
It sounds like you're both learning that lesson. After the colonel left, Maya found herself walking with Thompson toward the meal area.
The tension between them had finally broken, replaced by something that felt almost like mutual respect. "You know," Thompson said quietly, "I owe you an apology.
I've been treating you like the enemy when we're supposed to be on the same team."
"We've both been under a lot of pressure," Maya replied.
"And I haven't always handled things perfectly either." "Are you kidding? You've been amazing."
"I was just too stubborn and scared to admit it." Maya stopped walking and looked at him directly.
"Scared of what?"
Thompson was quiet for a long moment. "Scared that if a 5'3" woman could outperform me, it meant I didn't belong here. Scared that everything I thought I knew about myself was wrong."
Maya nodded slowly. "I'd been scared too.
Scared that no matter how well I performed, people would always see me as the little girl playing dress-up in a Marine uniform."
"Well, after today, I don't think anyone's going to see you that way."
That evening, as Maya sat around the campfire with her team, she reflected on how much had changed over the past week.
The dynamics within their group had shifted completely.
Thompson had evolved from an adversary into someone she could respect and work with.
Jenkins had become a genuine friend and supporter.
Even Rodriguez, Williams, and Patterson had developed into a cohesive unit that could function effectively under pressure. But, more than that, Maya had proven to herself that she truly belonged here. All the doubts, all the fears, all the whispered comments about her size and gender, none of that mattered when measured against actual performance and results.
"So what happens tomorrow?" Jenkins asked as they prepared for their final night in the wilderness.
"Tomorrow we find out who gets to move on to the next phase of training," Maya replied.
"And who goes home? Are you nervous?" Williams asked.
Maya looked around at her teammates, people who had become friends and allies over the course of their shared ordeal.
"Not really. I know I've done my best, and I've proven everything I needed to prove. Whatever happens tomorrow, I can live with it."
But, even as she said the words, Maya knew that tomorrow would bring one final test, one last opportunity to prove that she was ready to become a Marine officer. And she was determined to meet that challenge with the same courage and determination that had brought her this far. As she drifted off to sleep under the stars, Maya thought about her grandfather's stories of the Pacific War, about the young men who had proven themselves in situations far more dangerous than anything she would face. She thought about her parents, who were probably worrying about her at that very moment, still unsure whether they had done the right thing by letting her pursue this dream. Most of all, she thought about the little girl who had once sat alone at lunch, reading military history books while other kids whispered about how strange she was. That little girl had grown up to capture an entire enemy organization single-handedly, to earn the respect of Marines who had initially dismissed her, and to prove that courage came in all shapes and sizes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities to excel. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at Quantico, Maya Chen fell asleep feeling completely confident about who she was and what she was capable of achieving. The final day of the advanced combat simulation would determine not just who would move on to the next phase of training, but who had truly earned the right to call themselves a future Marine officer.
Maya was ready for whatever came next.
The final morning of the advanced combat simulation dawned gray and cold, with a bitter wind that cut through even the warmest clothing. Maya woke before sunrise, as had become her habit, and spent a few quiet minutes watching the forest come alive around their camp. In a few hours, she would know whether all of her struggles and sacrifices had been worth it. The final exercise was unlike anything they had faced before. Instead of working in their established teams, all 36 remaining candidates would be randomly divided into new groups and given a complex mission that would test every skill they had learned over the past months. But there was a twist that no one had anticipated. Colonel Martinez gathered all the candidates in the central clearing as the sun was rising. "Ladies and gentlemen, your final exercise will be conducted under the observation of a panel of senior Marine officers who are here to evaluate your potential for advanced leadership positions. This isn't just about passing or failing the officer candidate school, this is about identifying the future leaders of the Marine Corps." Maya felt her stomach clench with nervous energy. She had known that today would be important, but she hadn't realized that her performance could affect her entire career trajectory. You will be divided into 6 teams of 6 candidates each, the colonel continued. Each team will be assigned a different objective, but all objectives are interconnected as part of a larger strategic scenario. Success will require not just individual excellence but coordination between teams and adaptive leadership as situations develop. Maya found herself assigned to a team with 5 people she had never worked with before, candidates from other squads who were virtual strangers to her. Her new teammates included Martinez, no relation to the colonel, a former college wrestler from California, Kim, a quiet but highly competent candidate who had consistently performed well in all exercises, Divas, a former Navy enlisted sailor who was trying to become a Marine officer, Patel, a recent engineering graduate who excelled at logistics and planning, and Foster, a former high school teacher who had surprised everyone with her tactical instincts. As Maya studied her new team, she realized that none of them knew about her recent performance or her reputation within her original squad. To them, she was just another candidate, which meant she would have to prove herself all over again. Their mission briefing was sobering. Intelligence indicated that a terrorist organization had established a stronghold in a heavily fortified compound about 10 miles from their current position. Maya's team was tasked with conducting reconnaissance of the compound and identifying weaknesses that could be exploited by the main assault force. It sounded straightforward, but Maya had learned to be suspicious of missions that seemed too simple. Martinez, who was the largest and most physically imposing member of their team, immediately assumed the role of team leader. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We'll approach the compound in a standard reconnaissance formation, establish an observation post, and gather intelligence for 24 hours before reporting back." Maya studied the mission materials while Martinez outlined his plan. Something about the scenario bothered her, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The compound was supposedly heavily defended, but the mission called for just 6 people to conduct reconnaissance. That seemed like either an impossible task or a setup for something more complex. "What's our backup plan if we're discovered?" Maya asked. "We withdraw and report back," Martinez replied. "This is a reconnaissance mission, not an assault." "But what if withdrawal isn't possible? What if they have patrols that cut off our escape routes?" Martinez looked annoyed. "Chen, right? Look, I appreciate your concern, but I've been doing this longer than you have. Let's focus on the primary mission instead of worrying about unlikely scenarios." Maya bit back her first response and tried a different approach. "I'm just thinking that if this compound is as heavily defended as the briefing suggests, they're probably running active security patrols. We should have contingency plans for contact with the enemy." Kim spoke up for the first time. "Chen has a point. The briefing mentioned that other teams have tried to reconnoiter this position and haven't reported back. That suggests the enemy is more active than we're assuming." Martinez's jaw tightened. "Fine. If we make contact, we'll improvise. But the mission is reconnaissance, and that's what we're going to do." As they prepared to move out, Maya noticed that Foster was studying the mission materials with the same concerned expression that Maya felt. When Maya caught her eye, Foster mouthed a single word: "setup." Maya nodded slightly. She was beginning to suspect that this final exercise was designed to test more than just their ability to follow orders and execute standard tactics. The instructors were probably looking for candidates who could recognize when situations were more complex than they appeared and adapt accordingly. The 10-mile approach to the target compound took them through some of the most difficult terrain they had encountered during the entire exercise. Dense forest gave way to rocky hills, then to open meadows that offered little concealment. Maya found herself constantly scanning for signs that they were being observed, and she noticed that Kim was doing the same thing. About 2 miles from their objective, Maya spotted something that confirmed her worst suspicions. Fresh tire tracks crossed their path, heading in the direction of the compound. The tracks were recent, probably from within the last few hours, and they suggested that the enemy was actively resupplying their position. "Martinez," Maya called softly, "we've got fresh vehicle tracks here." Martinez examined the tracks briefly and shrugged. "Supply run. Doesn't change our mission." But Maya was already studying the tracks more carefully. The tire pattern was military, and the depth suggested a heavy vehicle, possibly armored. This wasn't a routine supply run, this was evidence of significant enemy activity in the area.
These tracks suggest they're expecting trouble, Maya said.
Look at how deep they are, and the tread pattern indicates an armored vehicle.
They're not just running supplies, they're reinforcing their defenses.
Foster moved over to examine the tracks as well.
She's right.
This pattern suggests they moved at least 2 heavy vehicles through here in the last 6 hours. That's a lot of activity for a supposedly static defensive position.
Martinez was beginning to look frustrated.
Look, I understand you're both trying to contribute, but we have our orders. We're going to establish an observation post and conduct reconnaissance.
End of story.
Maya and Foster exchanged glances.
It was becoming clear that Martinez was more concerned with following the literal interpretation of their orders than with adapting to changing circumstances.
That kind of rigid thinking could get all of them killed in a real combat situation.
As they continued toward their objective, Maya began to notice other signs that suggested their mission was more dangerous than advertised.
There were communication antennas visible on several hilltops, indicating a sophisticated early warning network. The approaches to the compound had been cleared of vegetation in ways that would make approaching forces visible from a considerable distance. Most ominously, Maya spotted what appeared to be defensive positions that hadn't been mentioned in their intelligence briefing. When they finally reached a position where they could observe the compound, Maya's worst fears were confirmed. This wasn't just a terrorist stronghold, it was a full-scale military fortification with multiple defensive layers, sophisticated communication systems, and evidence of significant personnel and equipment.
Jesus, Davis whispered as he studied the compound through binoculars. This place looks like it could hold off an army.
Maya took her turn with the binoculars and conducted a systematic analysis of the defensive positions. What she saw made her blood run cold.
The compound wasn't just heavily defended, it was actively preparing for an attack.
She could see personnel moving with purpose, weapons being positioned, and vehicles being camouflaged.
Martinez, we need to report back immediately, Maya said. This isn't a reconnaissance target, it's a trap. They know we're coming, and they're ready for us. You're being paranoid, Chen. Our job is to observe and report, and that's what we're going to do. But, even as Martinez spoke, Maya caught a glimpse of movement on the ridge behind them.
She focused her binoculars on the area and felt her heart skip a beat. There were enemy patrols moving to cut off their escape routes, exactly as she had feared.
Contact! Maya hissed, pointing toward the ridge.
Enemy patrol, approximately 1 kilometer behind us, moving to flank our position.
This time, Martinez didn't dismiss her warning.
He grabbed the binoculars and confirmed what Maya had seen.
Shit! How many? At least 8, possibly more.
They're moving in a tactical formation, and they know exactly where we are.
Foster was already packing up their observation equipment.
We need to move now, before they complete the encirclement. But Martinez seemed frozen by indecision. The rigid plan he had developed didn't account for this situation, and he appeared unable to adapt quickly enough to the changing circumstances.
Maya realized that if someone didn't take charge immediately, they were all going to be captured or eliminated.
She made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. "Listen up," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority despite her small stature. "We're about to be surrounded, and our primary mission is now survival and evasion. Kim and Patel, you're going to create a diversion to the north while the rest of us move south toward the extraction point. Foster, you're our navigation specialist, plot the fastest route through the rough terrain where vehicles can't follow us."
"Wait a minute," Martinez protested. "I'm the team leader here."
"Then, lead," Maya replied bluntly.
"Give us a plan that gets us out of here alive, or step aside and let someone else do it."
Martinez stared at her for a moment, and Maya could see the exact moment when he realized that she was right. His rigid adherence to the original plan had put the team in danger, and he didn't have the flexibility to adapt to the new situation.
"You're right," he said quietly. "Take point, Chen. What do you need us to do?" Maya felt a surge of adrenaline as she shifted into full leadership mode.
Kim and Patel, I need you to move about 200 meters north and create noise and movement that will draw their attention. Don't engage unless you have to, and, when you break contact, head for the secondary extraction point. Davis, you're our communications specialist, get on the radio and warn the other teams that this entire scenario is more complex than briefed. As her teammates moved to execute her plan, Maya felt the familiar calm that came over her in high-stress situations. This was what she had been training for her entire life, the moment when quick thinking, decisive leadership, and tactical expertise came together to solve an impossible problem. The diversion worked perfectly. Kim and Patel managed to draw most of the enemy patrol toward the north, giving Maya's group time to begin their escape and evasion. But, as they moved through the forest toward their extraction point, Maya realized that the exercise was far from over. Radio chatter from other teams indicated that all 6 groups were facing similar situations. Each team had been given what appeared to be a simple mission, only to discover that they were actually part of a complex, interconnected scenario where success required adaptation, creativity, and leadership under extreme pressure. Maya's team made it to the extraction point ahead of schedule, but, instead of ending the exercise, they were given new orders. Intelligence indicated that the enemy was planning a major offensive against the main base camp, and all teams needed to coordinate a defensive strategy. What followed was the most complex military exercise that any of the candidates had ever experienced. Maya found herself not just leading her own team but coordinating with other team leaders to develop an integrated defensive plan. Her small stature, which had once made her seem weak, became an advantage as she moved quickly between positions and communicated with multiple teams. The final engagement lasted 4 hours and involved all 36 candidates working together to defend their base against a coordinated attack by Marine instructors playing the role of enemy forces. Maya's tactical insights and leadership decisions were crucial to the success of the defense, and, by the end of the exercise, she had effectively become the field commander for the entire operation. When the exercise finally ended, Maya found herself standing in front of the same panel of senior officers who had been observing their performance. But, this time, she felt no nervousness or uncertainty. She had proven everything she needed to prove, not just to them but to herself. Candidate Chen, Colonel Martinez said, "Your performance over the past 5 days has been exceptional. But, I'm particularly interested in what happened during the final exercise. Can you walk us through your decision-making process when you assumed command of your team?" Maya took a deep breath and organized her thoughts. "Sir, I realized that our original plan was based on incomplete intelligence and that the situation was evolving faster than our established command structure could adapt. I assessed that immediate action was required to prevent casualties, and I made the decision to take initiative when our designated leader was unable to adapt quickly enough." "That's a diplomatic way of putting it," one of the other officers said with a slight smile. "What you actually did was override your team leader's authority and implement your own plan under extreme pressure. That takes considerable confidence and courage." "Sir, I believe that leadership isn't about rank or position, it's about making good decisions when people's lives are at stake. If I had waited for permission or followed a plan that I knew was flawed, my team could have been eliminated." "And how do you think your team leader felt about your decision to override his authority?" Maya glanced over at Martinez, who was standing nearby with the rest of her team. To her surprise, he stepped forward and addressed the panel directly. "Sir, Candidate Chen made the right call. I was too rigid in my thinking and too slow to adapt when the situation changed. Her decision probably saved all of our lives, and her leadership during the final engagement was outstanding. If I end up serving under her someday, I'd consider myself lucky." The panel of officers exchanged glances, and Maya could see something that looked like satisfaction in their expressions. "Candidate Chen," Colonel Martinez said, "based on your performance during this exercise and throughout the officer candidate school, you are hereby recommended for immediate advancement to Marine Officer Basic Course. Furthermore, you are being considered for inclusion in an accelerated leadership program that will prepare you for advanced command positions." Maya felt her knees go weak with relief and pride. She had not just passed the officer candidate school, she had distinguished herself as a future leader of Marines. But Colonel Martinez wasn't finished.
There's one more thing, Candidate Chen.
Your performance has been so exceptional that several of the observing officers have requested that you be assigned to their units when you complete your training. You'll have your choice of some of the most prestigious positions available to new Marine officers. As Maya stood at attention, listening to the colonel outline her future opportunities, she thought about all the people who had doubted her along the way. The high school classmates who had mocked her dreams, the family members who had tried to talk her out of joining the Marines, and especially the fellow candidates who had called her princess and assumed she was too small and weak to succeed.
They had been wrong about everything.
That evening, as the candidates celebrated the completion of their training, Maya found herself approached by Thompson, her former squadmate who had given her so much trouble early in the program.
"Maya," he said, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a thank you."
"For what?"
"For showing me what real leadership looks like.
For proving that courage and competence don't come in standard sizes.
And for never giving up, even when people like me were too stupid to recognize what we were seeing."
Maya smiled and extended her hand. "We're going to be Marines together, Thompson.
That makes us family."
As they shook hands, Maya realized that her journey was just beginning. Officer Candidate School had been the first step, not the final destination. But she also knew that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. 3 months later, Second Lieutenant Maya Chen graduated at the top of her class from Marine Officer Basic Course. 6 months after that, she was deployed to Afghanistan as a platoon leader, where she would earn her first combat decorations for actions that saved the lives of her Marines and completed missions that others had considered impossible. But those are stories for another day. The little girl who had once sat alone at lunch, reading military history books while others whispered behind her back, had grown up to become exactly what she had always dreamed of being, a United States Marine officer, respected by her peers, trusted by her superiors, and ready to lead others into whatever challenges the future might hold.
The nickname Princess had disappeared entirely, replaced by something much more meaningful: respect.
And, as Maya looked back on her journey from that small Oregon town to the Marines, she realized that every moment of doubt, every challenge, and every person who had underestimated her had made her stronger and more determined to succeed. She had proven that heroes come in all sizes, and that the size of one's heart and determination matter far more than the size of one's frame. Maya Chen had become living proof that courage, intelligence, and leadership could overcome any obstacle and any prejudice. The Marines had gained not just another officer, but a leader who would inspire others to reach beyond their limitations and achieve things they never thought possible. And, for Maya, this was just the beginning of a career that would prove, time and again, that the most powerful weapon in any Marine's arsenal is an unbreakable will to succeed.